Hey guys, in this video we're doing two different knotting techniques for putting a knot right up close next to a bead or in between the beads here. So we're doing a single strand and a double strand knotting technique. And the idea with knotting is that we get our knots and beads really nice and close together so that those beads don't slide along and have any movement. For the single strand knotting technique, we're using a knotting tool or beading awl, just a pointed metal tool. So I've got my amber necklace here that I'm making. So I've got my last bead on and my last knot as well. So I'll just place my next bead onto the thread and pull it down against that last knot, making sure that knot is nice and tight. Now with our right hand we bring the cord around to form a loop and bring the end through the loop, forming an overhand knot. Now holding that knot against the table with my left hand, grabbing our beading awl and placing it inside the overhand knot. Then pulling the tail down and pulling that knot up nice and close to the bead. Pushing it up a couple of times, making sure it's nice and tight. Then taking our beading awl out and placing it in the other side of the knot, pushing it up as much as we can. Then I push it with my fingernail as well, just making sure it's really nice and tight. So you really want those beads up nice and close together and those knots in between really tight. Now each time we place a bead on, we pull it down tight against that previous knot, just to make sure it's locked in place. Then we bring the cord around to form a loop, bringing the end through the loop, holding it with our left hand on the table, placing our beading awl inside the knot and pulling it up close to the bead. Then taking the beading awl out and putting it in the other side of the knot, pulling it up tight and securing it with our fingernail. Now you just continue on with that same technique for your whole necklace, making sure your beads and knots are nice and tight and close together. So that's the single strand knotting technique. Now it's on to the double strand technique. Now the holes in my beads here are a little bit big, so those knots are slipping just inside, but hopefully you can see that there is actually a knot in between each bead and we've got two strands on this necklace. Now we've already got a knot on the end, so first up we're just placing our bead onto both threads, pulling it up nice and tight onto that previous bead to lock it in place. Now holding the beaded part in our left hand, with our right hand we bring the threads apart and we're also holding this bottom thread here upwards. Now we bring the beaded section around, placing the top of the beads against that thread and bringing the beads through the loop on the bottom. Now we pull those threads tight and that pulls that knot tight right on top of the beads. So you can pull those cords apart and work with your threads a little bit so that your knot's nice and tight and sitting right next to your bead. So now we just repeat that same process. So placing a bead onto both of our cords. Now again, bringing our threads apart, holding this underneath cord upwards. See, I just tuck it under my fingers there to hold it up. Now place the top of the beads against that cord there and bring the beaded section through the loop on the bottom. Now pulling those cords apart to pull that knot down nice and tight right next to your bead. Now you just continue placing your knots in between each bead until your necklace is at the desired length. Pulling each bead up against the previous knot to make it tight, holding those cords apart, bringing the beads around and through the bottom loop, pulling them nice and tight. And there's your double strand knotting technique.